She was seen walking down a quiet Oregon road. And then she was gone. No scream, no struggle. Just silence so deep it chilled an entire town. 20 years after she vanished, a hunter found something buried beneath the roots of an old cedar tree. Something that reopened the case no one dared talk about. Detectives uncovered a single item from 1981 that looked untouched by time. And it didn't belong to anyone in the family or the town. For decades, one person carried a secret about the night she disappeared. A detail so disturbing they refused to speak until now. A routine test hit on a name no one expected. A match that rewired the investigation and revealed a path police had missed for years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us which country and state you are watching from. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. She vanished from a quiet Oregon town in the fall of 1981. Her name was Lisa Monroe, 16 years old, soft-spoken, known for her love of hiking the forest trails that wound through the foothills east of Eugene. On the morning she disappeared, the sky was pale and cool, the air holding that restless edge between summer and winter. She left her friend's house just after 4, a denim jacket over her shoulders and her backpack slung loosely across one arm. She was expected home before dark. She never made it. In the hours that followed, her absence didn't seem unusual. In a small town, teenagers wandered. Sometimes they stopped to talk. Sometimes they walked a little slower just to avoid going home too soon. But by nightfall, her mother began to worry. The porch light stayed on, burning into the damp October air, and by morning, Lisa's name was on every pair of lips in the neighborhood. The local sheriff's office launched a search. Volunteers from nearby towns joined in, combing through woods and fields with flashlights and dogs. The local radio station broadcast her description every hour. 5'4", brown hair, green eyes, last seen wearing a faded blue jacket. Helicopters circled the tree line. Rivers were dragged, but the forest gave nothing back. Within 2 weeks, the case had gone cold. The posters stayed up for months, curling at the corners from rain. People whispered theories that she'd run away, that she'd been taken by someone passing through. But there were no footprints, no signs of struggle, no body. The case file grew thick with notes and empty leads. And over time, the name Lisa Monroe began to fade into the long gray history of the unsolved. For her family, the years that followed were heavy and quiet. Her mother Ellen never left the porch light off again. Her father, a carpenter, spent months building wooden crosses, each one meant to mark a memory he refused to let die. Her younger brother, only 12 at the time, grew up surrounded by a silence that pressed against the walls of their home. By 1990, the Monroe case had been reduced to a box on a shelf at the Lane County Sheriff's Office, labeled in thick marker, Monroe, L. Missing person. 1981. Inside were photographs, interviews, and one brown paper evidence bag sealed with tape. It contained a small lock of hair recovered from Lisa's backpack, found 2 days after her disappearance, lying near an old logging trail. Back then it meant little. DNA testing was still in its infancy, but for one detective, that detail would linger in the back of his mind for decades. His name was Detective Michael Reeves, young, ambitious and new to the department in 1981. He remembered the search, the desperation, the feeling that something had been overlooked. When he retired in 2019, he asked permission to take one last look at the old case files, the ones that had haunted him his entire career. The Monroe file was the first he pulled. It was dusted with time, notes written in fading ink, Polaroids of evidence that no longer existed, and that sealed brown bag with the hair sample, still there, still waiting. Reeves had seen cold cases solved through DNA more than once before, but the thought that this one might finally yield answers brought back the ache of that long-ago October. He requested the evidence be sent for modern testing. When the results came back, what they revealed changed everything. The DNA matched a man named Harold Brenner, a retired auto mechanic, 78 years old, living in a cabin less than 3 miles from where Lisa had last been seen. Back in 1981, Brenner had been interviewed briefly. He told investigators he'd seen Lisa walking along the road, but claimed he hadn't stopped. There had been no reason to suspect him then. But now, 4 decades later, his name was the one written in bold across the final page of the report. When detectives arrived at his home in early 2023, Brenner was quiet, polite, almost unsurprised. He'd lived alone for years, keeping to himself. The small cabin was cluttered but neat. Old tools, yellowed newspapers, and a photograph of a young woman pinned to the wall near his workbench. It wasn't Lisa, but someone who looked very much like her. Detectives searched the property for 2 days. In the rusted metal box buried near a woodpile, they found what appeared to be pieces of fabric, old and brittle, matching the pattern of the jacket Lisa had worn when she vanished. DNA confirmed it. News of the arrest spread quickly through the town, a place that had long stopped expecting closure. Local headlines read, "Oregon 1981 cold case solved. Suspect arrested after 42 years." But behind the relief was disbelief. Many residents still remembered Brenner from his years working at a local garage. To them, he was a quiet man who fixed cars and minded his business. In interviews, Detective Reeves described the moment he received confirmation of the DNA match. He said it felt like the forest finally exhaled. For 42 years, Lisa's story had been buried beneath silence, and now the truth was surfacing. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. As investigators pieced together the evidence, they began to reconstruct Lisa's final hours. Witness statements placed her near the logging trail around dusk. A truck similar to Brenner's was seen parked nearby. Forensic analysis showed that the hair from her backpack carried traces of Brenner's DNA, likely from direct contact. The details were grim, but they fit together with the precision of truth. During questioning, Brenner remained composed. He didn't deny knowing Lisa, but claimed he barely remembered that day. When confronted with the evidence, his silence deepened. Eventually, he confessed, not in words, but in a small nod that carried the weight of decades. For the Monroe family, the call came on a Thursday afternoon. Ellen, now in her 80s, answered the phone. On the other end, a soft voice said, "Mrs. Monroe, we found him." She sat quietly for a long time, then whispered, "I knew she never left us." She was always waiting. The arrest closed the investigation, but it didn't erase the years of pain. For those who remembered Lisa, it brought a bittersweet kind of peace, one born not from justice, but from acknowledgement. Her story was finally being told again, this time not as a mystery, but as a truth long denied. In the months that followed, the community held a memorial at the same field where search parties once gathered. The air smelled of rain and pine. A small wooden cross stood at the center, carved with her initials. As the sun dipped below the trees, people spoke softly about the girl they'd lost, and about the years that had slipped away in silence. 42 years after she vanished, Lisa Monroe's story had come full circle. From disappearance to discovery, from fear to closure. Yet even as her case was officially marked solved, the haunting question lingered. How many others like her still waited in the quiet corners of time, their truths buried beneath dust and memory? Because in every small town, there are stories like this, stories that never made the news, stories that linger in the echoes of forests and rivers, waiting for someone to listen. And sometimes, all it takes is a single piece of evidence, a forgotten strand of hair, to bring them back to life. And so, in the stillness of Oregon's autumn woods, where the leaves fall just as they did in 1981, the truth of Lisa Monroe finally rests, not lost, not forgotten, but found. Now, for years after Lisa Monroe vanished, the case remained frozen in time, a wound the town learned to live with. The missing posters came down. The reporters stopped calling. The Monroe family moved to a smaller house near the edge of town, where the woods opened wide behind them. A constant reminder, of what they had lost. The early 1980s were not kind to missing persons cases. Without DNA databases or digital records, investigators worked with what they had. Fingerprints, witness statements, hunches. A single misstep could bury a case forever. And for Lisa, there was no shortage of dead ends. Every time a body was found in Oregon, her name surfaced briefly, only to fade again when dental records didn't match. Detective Reeves stayed on the force, moving from uniformed patrol to investigations. Over the years, he handled robberies, assaults, domestic disputes, or the steady grind of small-town policing. But every so often, when he passed the evidence room, he'd glance at the cold case shelves. He knew exactly where the Monroe box sat. In 1993, he reopened the file briefly, hoping new technology might help. A lab in Portland had begun experimenting with mitochondrial DNA extraction, revolutionary at the time, but still limited. The sample from Lisa's backpack was too degraded, the chain of custody uncertain. The report came back the same way it always had, inconclusive. Still, the attempt renewed a flicker of hope. Reeves reached out to Lisa's mother to let her know he hadn't forgotten. She thanked him softly and said, "I just want her to come home one way or another." Years became decades. Reeves married, had children, and watched them grow. But the Monroe case followed him like a shadow, one he couldn't shake, even as retirement loomed. It wasn't guilt. It was something quieter, more persistent. The sense that somewhere, buried in the noise of the past, an answer had always been waiting. By the mid-2000s, cold case work in Oregon had changed. Grants and new forensic labs brought old evidence back into focus. Detectives who had once relied on hunches now had databases, DNA profiles, and tools their predecessors could only dream of. Reeves, nearing 60, joined a small unit dedicated to reviewing long unsolved cases. He brought one file with him on his first day, Lisa Monroe, missing since October 1981. The evidence was slim: the hair sample, her backpack, and an old map marking the last known search area. But it was enough. In 2008, the hair was sent for testing again, this time using short tandem repeat (STR) analysis, the method that had begun solving decades-old crimes nationwide. The process took months. When the report came back, it confirmed what Reeves already suspected. The DNA belonged to Lisa. But there was more. A second partial profile was present, male, unknown but viable. That sliver of information breathed life back into the case. The Oregon State Police entered the unknown profile into CODIS, the National DNA Database. Nothing matched. Whoever the man was, he had never been arrested for a serious crime. The file went back on the shelf, but not forgotten. Reeves retired officially in 2019, but he stayed close to the department, volunteering occasionally to assist on cold case reviews. It was then, during a data migration of old files, that the Monroe evidence resurfaced yet again. A younger detective, Sarah Caldwell, was leading the new forensic initiative. When she came across the Monroe file, she noticed something odd. The original hair sample envelope had been sealed with two different types of tape. The second seal was dated 1984, likely from an internal audit. Caldwell called Reeves. They met for coffee in downtown Eugene, and she slid the file across the table. "It's still intact," she said. "We could reprocess it with mitochondrial genome sequencing. It's the new method, much more sensitive." Reeves stared at the worn folder and smiled faintly. "Then let's do it," he said. It took nearly 6 months to process. The lab extracted DNA not only from the hair, but also from fibers clinging to the evidence bag, fragments so small they'd been invisible in earlier tests. This time the results were definitive. The unknown male DNA profile was complete enough to be uploaded for genealogical comparison. By 2022, investigative genealogy had become a quiet revolution in law enforcement. Using public ancestry databases, analysts could trace familial matches, distant relatives, cousins, even great-grandchildren, to identify suspects who'd eluded capture for decades. It was controversial, but for cases like Lisa Monroe's, it was the only path left. Within weeks, the search produced a lead, a family tree rooted in southern Oregon, connected by a single name: Brenner. When Reeves heard the name, something in him went still. He remembered the man from the original interviews. Middle-aged, quiet, drove a rust-red pickup, lived alone near the logging roads. Nothing about him had raised suspicion back then. He'd been calm, helpful, ordinary. Further testing confirmed it. The genealogical link pointed to Harold Brenner, age 78, still residing in the same area. His DNA, obtained through discarded material, matched perfectly with the male profile from Lisa's backpack. The news hit Reeves harder than he expected. For 42 years, he had lived with the weight of not knowing. Now the truth was tangible, and it had been living quietly just miles away all along. The arrest came on a cold February morning in 2023. Detectives approached the cabin at dawn. Brenner answered the door wearing a wool sweater and heavy glasses. When they read the warrant aloud, he didn't argue. He simply nodded, as though the words were long overdue. Inside, the cabin was a museum of a solitary life. Stacks of newspapers, neatly labeled jars of screws, an old radio tuned to static. On the wall hung a photo of a young woman from decades earlier, not Lisa, but someone with the same soft eyes and brown hair. Beneath it sat a small wooden box. Inside were scraps of fabric and a rusted keychain engraved with the letter Elm. The items were sent to the lab. The fibers matched Lisa's clothing. The keychain had belonged to her. News of the breakthrough spread quickly. Local stations ran headlines, podcasts recounted the timeline, and national outlets picked up the story of a small-town mystery solved by science and persistence. But behind the headlines were people, investigators, family members, residents, each processing the truth in their own quiet way. For Reeves, it was not triumph. It was closure edged with sorrow. The moment he learned the DNA match was confirmed, he sat alone in his office, staring at the old Polaroid of Lisa. The photo had been taken 2 weeks before she vanished. She was smiling, her hair windblown, her eyes bright. "We found you," he whispered. At the Monroe home, Ellen sat in her armchair when detectives came to deliver the news in person. She listened without tears, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "He lived right there all this time?" she asked softly. When they nodded, she closed her eyes. Then maybe she was never far away. That spring, as the case officially closed, Reeves attended the small memorial held in Lisa's honor. It wasn't grand, just family, a few friends, and members of the old search team. They stood in the same field where they'd once gathered with flashlights and maps. The trees had grown taller, the air just as damp with rain. Someone played a recording of Lisa's favorite song from the early 80s, a tune about coming home. When the music faded, Reeves placed a single white rose on the wooden cross, marked with her initials. For the first time in 42 years, he felt the forest around him grow quiet, not with absence, but with peace. Later that night, sitting by the window of his small house, Reeves opened a notebook he'd kept since 1981. The first entry was dated the week Lisa disappeared. "We'll find her," it read. He turned to the last page and wrote, "We did." But the story didn't end there. After Brenner's arrest, investigators continued to search his property. They uncovered old newspaper clippings, photographs, and maps marked with red circles. Some of the locations corresponded to other unsolved disappearances from the 1970s and early 80s across Oregon and Northern California. While no further charges were immediately filed, the findings opened new lines of inquiry, suggesting that Lisa Monroe may not have been Brenner's only victim. Forensic analysts began comparing DNA samples from those cold cases to Brenner's. The process was slow, methodical, burdened by time and degradation. Yet each test carried the possibility of another family finding the same closure the Monroes had finally received. By summer 2023, Brenner's health began to fail. He was transferred to a state medical facility awaiting trial. He rarely spoke. When asked by investigators why he had kept Lisa's belongings, he responded only once, "Because I couldn't let her go." Reeves followed the case quietly from home, reading every update, every court document. He had dedicated his life to finding answers, and now that he had one, he found himself grappling with the silence that followed. He understood finally that justice was not the same as peace, but sometimes it was enough. By the time the case reached court, the story of Lisa Monroe had traveled far beyond the boundaries of Oregon. Newspapers across the country ran features under solemn headlines. "Justice after 4 decades. Science solves the silence. Oregon's oldest cold case breaks open." But for those closest to it, the attention felt unreal, as if the world was only now discovering a tragedy that had lived inside them for most of their lives. The courtroom was small, tucked within the Lane County Justice Center, its walls lined with portraits of judges long retired. The trial was scheduled for early autumn 2023. Outside, the leaves were beginning to turn again, just as they had in the year Lisa disappeared. The defendant, Harold Brenner, entered slowly, assisted by a deputy. Age had stripped him of the strength he once had. His hair was thin and grey, his shoulders hunched. Yet when he looked toward the gallery, his eyes held the same steady calm that had unnerved investigators decades before. Prosecutors laid out their case meticulously. They spoke of the DNA evidence, of the fibers found in the buried box, of the keychain engraved with Lisa's initial. They reconstructed the sequence of that October evening, using witness statements and forensic data to form a timeline that spanned 42 years. The defense had little to stand on. They argued contamination, memory decay, procedural missteps, the usual defenses in cases built on old evidence. But the science was clear, and the confession, though wordless, spoke louder than anything else. Detective Reeves was called to testify. His voice was steady but low, carrying the weight of time. He described the original investigation, the sleepless nights, the small-town searches, and the moment he held the lab report confirming the DNA match. The courtroom listened in silence. Some jurors wiped their eyes. Reeves ended his testimony with one simple line: "We never stopped looking for her." Ellen Monroe attended every session. She sat in the second row, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression calm and distant. When shown a photograph of Lisa, smiling in the sunlight, her hair tied back, she closed her eyes briefly, as though preserving the image behind her eyelids. After 9 days of testimony, the jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict: guilty. When the judge read the sentence, life imprisonment without parole, Brenner didn't react. He only looked down at his hands, as though studying them for the first time. The courtroom was silent. Outside, the rain began to fall against the windows, soft and steady, a sound like the turning of a page. Reporters gathered at the courthouse steps, cameras flashing as Ellen exited with Reeves beside her. She didn't speak to the microphones. She simply said, "Lisa can rest now," and kept walking. The town of Eugene, long accustomed to the shadow of the case, found itself adjusting to the quiet after closure. For weeks, the local paper ran retrospectives, interviews with former classmates, neighbors, and volunteers from the original search teams. Some spoke of relief. Others admitted they felt haunted all over again. The idea that Brenner had lived among them, unnoticed, was difficult to accept. In the sheriff's office, the Monroe case file was finally stamped closed. Reeves stood by as the clerk entered it into the system, the sound of the stamp echoing faintly in the quiet room. He watched as the box, worn and faded, was placed on the archive shelf one last time. Then he turned away, his work done. But closure is not simple. It doesn't arrive in triumph or finality. It settles slowly, like dusk creeping across a field. Reeves learned this in the weeks that followed. He would wake before dawn, the image of Lisa's face still vivid in his mind. He found himself driving the old roads where search parties once walked, listening to the whisper of wind through pine trees. It wasn't grief, it was habit, the reflex of someone who had spent a lifetime searching. He wasn't the only one haunted by the echoes of the case. Sarah Caldwell, the younger detective who had revived the investigation, began reviewing Brenner's old maps in more detail. There were markings in California, Washington, Idaho, locations that had no connection to Lisa, but matched the timelines of other disappearances. Some of those files were still open, some forgotten entirely. Caldwell contacted regional task forces, sharing the evidence, hoping to trace a wider pattern. Meanwhile, journalists descended on the story, eager to paint Brenner as a symbol, a ghost from the past, unearthed by modern science. But the truth, as always, was quieter. He was not extraordinary. He was ordinary in the most unsettling way, a man who had lived among others without suspicion, whose violence had been hidden beneath the simplicity of routine. In interviews, criminologists described cases like his as invisible crimes, those that slipped through the cracks of time and technology. One expert said, "What solved this case wasn't luck, it was persistence. Every piece of evidence matters, no matter how small." In the Monroe home, life adjusted in subtle ways. Ellen began gardening again. Her son David, now in his 50s, returned from out of state to visit more often. On the kitchen wall hung a framed photograph of Lisa at age 16, the same one used in the original missing poster. Underneath it, Ellen placed a small brass plaque that read, "Home at last." One afternoon, Reeves stopped by unannounced. He found Ellen sitting on the porch, her eyes fixed on the trees beyond the yard. They spoke little. After a while, she said quietly, "You gave me something I thought I'd never have, an ending." Reeves nodded, unsure how to respond. As he left, she added, "You know, I still turn the porch light on every night. Old habits die hard." He smiled gently. "Maybe keep it on, for all the others still waiting." As autumn deepened, the story of Lisa Monroe began to fade from the headlines. The world moved on to newer mysteries, fresher tragedies. But in Oregon, her name remained a quiet symbol of perseverance, a reminder that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, eventually rise. In November, a production team from a national documentary network contacted Reeves and Caldwell. They wanted to film a segment on the case, to walk through the timeline, retrace the investigation, and highlight the role of forensic genealogy. Reeves hesitated but agreed, not for attention, but because he believed stories like Lisa's could keep hope alive for other families. The filming took place on a grey morning near the old logging trail. The crew set up cameras among the damp ferns, the sound of rain steady on the leaves. Reeves stood in front of the lens, hands in his coat pockets, and told the story again. The same story he had lived through, spoken now with the calm cadence of someone who had made peace with it. When they asked how it felt to close the case after 42 years, he paused before answering. "It's not about closure," he said. "It's about remembering. If we remember, they're never truly gone." The segment aired a month later. For many viewers, it was the first time they had heard Lisa's name. For others, the ones who had lived with it since 1981, it was a final chapter. The documentary ended with aerial footage of the forest, sunlight filtering through the pines, and the narrator's voice fading into silence. Sometimes the truth doesn't vanish. It waits, patient, persistent, until someone finally listens. By the end of 2023, winter had settled over Eugene. The trees stood bare, the sky pale and low. At the sheriff's office, Caldwell continued her work, sifting through other cold files. On her desk, she kept a photograph of Lisa, not as a reminder of tragedy, but of what persistence could accomplish. Reeves, now fully retired, spent his mornings walking the trails outside town. The woods were quiet but not empty. Every so often he would stop, look around, and listen to the wind through the branches, to the faint rush of a distant stream, to the heartbeat of the forest that had kept its secret for 42 years. There was no satisfaction in the ending, no triumph. Only understanding that time doesn't erase pain, but it does reveal truth. And in the telling of that truth, there is healing. Lisa Monroe's story became part of Oregon's history, not as a statistic or a headline, but as a thread connecting generations of investigators, families, and those who refuse to forget. Her name joined the quiet chorus of others, found through persistence, patience, and the relentless pursuit of closure. Because in every case like hers, there lies a simple truth. Justice is never really about punishment. It's about remembering what was lost and refusing to let silence be the final word. And in that small town in Oregon, where the porch lights still glow against the endless dark, remembering is exactly what they continue to do. In the months after the verdict, the story of Lisa Monroe settled into the fabric of the town like mist over the valley. Ever present, but quieter now. People spoke of it less, not out of forgetfulness, but reverence. The name no longer carried only sorrow. It carried meaning. It stood for perseverance, for memory, for the strange endurance of truth. The field where volunteers once gathered to search was now part of a protected nature reserve. The county had renamed it Monroe Trailhead in her honor. A small wooden sign marked the entrance, its letters carved by hand, the edges softened by rain and time. Visitors who came to hike often paused to read the inscription, dedicated to the memory of Lisa Monroe, whose light guided a community through the dark. For those who remembered her, the classmates, the neighbors, the searchers, it was strange to think of her as part of history. She had once been a face on a poster, a voice of hope carried on the wind, and now she was a landmark, a story told to children who hadn't been born when she vanished. Ellen Monroe visited the trail often. She moved slower now, her steps careful, but she made the walk every Sunday morning. She would stop near the bend in the path where the trees opened into a clearing and sit for a while on the bench the sheriff's department had installed in her daughter's name. From there, she could see the horizon through the trees, the same direction Lisa had walked toward on her last afternoon alive. She never spoke aloud while she sat there, but sometimes, if the wind was still, she could almost hear her daughter's laughter echo faintly through the leaves. The sheriff's office continued to receive letters about the case, messages from other families, from students studying criminal justice, from people who simply wanted to thank the department for not giving up. Some enclosed photographs of missing loved ones, along with a single plea written in careful handwriting: "Please don't stop looking for Reeves." The closure of the Monroe case marked both an ending and a beginning. After decades of chasing ghosts, he found himself drawn to helping others facing the same long silence he once knew. He began volunteering with the Oregon Cold Case Foundation, reviewing old files, offering advice to young investigators. His name appeared in articles now and then, mentioned quietly in connection with other reopened cases. But he rarely spoke about his own story. When asked why he continued to work after retirement, he would simply say, "Because someone has to keep the light on." In his home office, Reeves kept two things framed on the wall: Lisa's original missing poster and the front page of the newspaper announcing the case had been solved. Between them hung a small brass key, the one from her keychain, returned by the evidence unit after the trial. It wasn't a symbol of triumph. It was a reminder of everything that had been lost before the truth was found. Detective Sarah Caldwell, meanwhile, became one of the leading voices in forensic genealogy in the Pacific Northwest. Her team's work led to breakthroughs in several other cold cases, each one a fragment of the past restored to the present. Whenever she lectured at conferences or universities, she used the Monroe case as her example of persistence. What solved that case, she would say, wasn't technology. It was people who refused to give up. By 2024, the documentary filmed the previous year had reached millions of viewers online. Comments poured in. Strangers from across the world writing about their own missing relatives, their own unanswered questions. Some said the story gave them hope. Others said it reminded them to look again at the old photos, the dusty evidence boxes, the unclosed doors. The film ended with a single line that stayed with viewers long after the credits rolled. Time does not hide the truth. It only waits for us to find it. In the quiet that followed, something remarkable happened. Donations began arriving at the Lane County Cold Case Unit. Anonymous contributions, handwritten notes, even small envelopes of cash. Within months, the department had enough funding to reopen several more long-forgotten files. The ripple of one solved case was awakening many others. Every file had a name. Every name had a family. And every family, like the Monroes, had lived too long in the space between hope and grief. Reeves watched it happen from afar, content to see the next generation carry the work forward. One winter morning, he received a letter in the mail. No return address, just his name written in careful cursive. Inside was a short note. Detective Reeves, thank you for remembering her. I was 12 when she disappeared. We sat next to each other in English class. She used to write stories about forests and storms. I kept one of them all these years. I thought you might want it. Folded neatly within was a single sheet of lined paper yellowed with age. In a young girl's handwriting it read, "Sometimes I think the forest remembers us. Maybe not our names, but our footsteps. The way we walked through it and the way we left it behind." Reeves read the words twice, then set the paper down. He thought about the woods, the search parties, the endless years of waiting, and he realized that Lisa had been right. The forest had remembered. It had held her story all that time, waiting for someone to listen. He placed the page in a small frame beside the missing poster. It wasn't official evidence, but to him, it was the most important artifact of all. As spring returned to Oregon, the Monroe trailhead bloomed with wildflowers. Visitors continued to come, leaving small offerings, ribbons, photos, handwritten notes. Some said they felt peace there. Others said they felt watched over. The forest had stopped being a place of loss. It had become a place of remembrance. Ellen passed away that summer quietly, in her sleep. At her funeral, the same song that once played at Lisa's memorial echoed softly through the chapel. Reeves attended, sitting in the back row. When the service ended, he walked outside into the sunlight and looked toward the distant hills. It had been 43 years since that October afternoon in 1981. Time had changed everything, yet somehow nothing at all. He drove to the trail one last time. The path was quiet, the ground damp beneath the pines. At the clearing, he stopped beside the bench engraved with Lisa's name and laid a single flower, white, simple, unadorned. The breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. For a moment he stood there listening. The forest whispered like it always had, steady, eternal. And in that sound, he heard not the echo of loss, but the hum of continuity, the way life carries forward even after everything else has fallen away. He turned to leave, walking back along the path, the light filtering through the trees in soft, golden strands. Behind him, the forest closed gently, as if sealing the memory where it belonged. Not buried, not hidden, but held. And that was how the story of Lisa Monroe ended, not with an explosion of justice or revenge, but with understanding. The kind that only comes when time and truth finally meet in the middle, because every cold case, every unanswered question, every missing name is, at its core, a conversation between past and present. Sometimes the voices are faint, sometimes they take decades to reach us. But if we keep listening, if we refuse to forget, they always find their way through. In Oregon, the porch lights still glow across the quiet streets at night. A habit carried forward by those who once searched and those who still wait. And somewhere in that soft light, the story of a 16-year-old girl endures. It reminds us that silence is not the end of a story. It's simply the space where truth gathers its strength, waiting patiently for someone to listen.